Hi everybody, my name is Gary L. I work for Engineered Arresting Systems Corporation, and we're the company that evolved from All American Aviation. I'm a marketing creative director for the company, been with them for 2 years. Prior to that I was a university professor, and I've worked for both the Air Force and the U.S. Army. So, oh, where's my flicker?
Sorry, can I blind you first? There you go.
What's that?
Can I blind you first?
Yeah. So over the course of the last couple of years, I've been fascinated by the things that the company was involved in, going all the way back to the foundation of aviation as we know it. And it's been interesting as we move along. We learn more and more every day about the company and aviation, about airmail pickup, and some of the contributions that we've made to both the aviation industry and airmail. This picture here, ironically, was in Popular Mechanics in 1929, and it was from the Boeing test that they did in Seattle. This would have been the first airmail pickup. In 1928 it was, at the Boeing field in Seattle, Washington, with the help of some of the Boeing engineers. Dr. Lyle Schuyler Adams was born at Paint Lick, Kentucky, January 31st, 1883. Ironically, he is the great-grandson of President John Adams. He graduated from dental school at St. Louis University in 1905, and during the years following graduation, Adams was an oral surgeon in Parsons, Kansas. He soon became associated with one of the men who helped make the Wright brothers a success, Cyrus Meade of Dayton, Ohio. Adams was on vacation in California in 1909 when he met Glenn Martin. The two men became friends, and this friendship served to deepen Adams' interest in aviation. Now, Glenn Martin actually made his first flight in that year, 1909. Very coincidental in Adams' life. Adams also became interested in real estate and agriculture while he was in California. And it was that necessity that prompted Adams to invent a spiral plow, which he manufactured for several years in St. Louis, Missouri. He returned to dental surgery in Seattle from 1923 to 1928. He invented the airmail pickup system in 1927 and gave up his dental practice again to devote full-time to developing the latest invention. The system was designed to permit the non-stop pickup and delivery of airmail to serve those smaller, more isolated communities that would normally be bypassed due to both economic and operational restraints. The original invention was just a large metal pan that tapered a slant to a slot. The plane would come down with a trailing cable with a steel ball at the end of it. The ball would travel up the slant where the slot trapped the ball, causing it to catapult the objects and carry them away. Very primitive, but it worked. But as the work progressed, it became evident that some sort of shock-absorbing mechanism was needed to overcome the kinetic forces resulting from the sudden engagement. The impact would be damaging to both the structure of the aircraft and the mail. Adams designed an adjustable spring-actuated catapult to throw the package forward at the same speed of the pickup aircraft. Relying on his own money, Adams built and tested hundreds of scale models, and he obtained the timely support of William Boeing, the Seattle aircraft builder. And Boeing's engineers helped design a full-scale model, which was mounted on a turntable, where the turntable could be moved depending on which way the wind was blowing. And there's Mr. Adams there. In August 1928, Doc acquired a Curtiss OX travel biplane and conducted the first public demonstration of the system. Lindbergh was there, Boeing was there, the Seattle postmaster, and some officials from the Commerce Department. The pilot was Clayton Scott, who was the well-known Boeing test pilot for like 60 years, died a few years ago. Swooped down, picked up 35 pounds of mail. Adams established the Adams Air Express, which was known as Adams Airmail Pickup and Deliver on February 14, 1929. He continued to do more tests in both Chicago and New York that even included in-flight refueling. The next theory Adams proposed was to shorten the amount of time it took from international shipboard mail. So hoping to establish the first contract, Adams gained funding for an experimental demonstration by the owner of the SS Leviathan and Clifford Ball from Clifford Ball Airlines. Clifford Ball Airlines would later turn into Pennsylvania Airlines, if there's any airplane buffs here. After a couple mishaps and a few attempts, it wasn't until June 12, 1929, that a Fairchild monoplane piloted by Commander George Pond successfully performed the first ship-to-shore pickup. And Adams, as well as a bunch of media folks, were on this ship when that actually occurred. You can come in. When Adams arrived back in the United States, he was confident he would receive the permanent contract. But there was a big media publicity stunt campaign that occurred. And this was right before the Depression. And because there was such a media buzz about it, it actually increased the shares of the company, which didn't go over too well with some of the shareholders. So he did not get the contract that he was hoping to get in 1929. So he goes out to Youngstown, Ohio. Clifford Ball, once again, was the operator of the Mail 11 contract air route between Pittsburgh and Cleveland. He saw the opportunity to augment the Adams method into his airmail route. So 2 of Ball's Fairchild FC-2s were fitted with preliminary pickup trials, which began on August 30th, 1929. And you can see the actual cover from that. And then in the left folder, or the top photo there, you can see the winch, which is attached almost to the wing. And that's the same winch which is in that Stinson outside, by the way. Clifford Ball's Fairchild FC-2 cab monoplane performs the pickup during the 29 tests. And you can see Doc Adams standing there in front of the one of the standard biplanes from Clifford Ball Airlines from the same year. This is one of my favorite photos. It really just tells the story. These great crowds would gather to watch this because it was such a unique opportunity to see a part of history being made. And it must have been awesome to watch this plane come screaming in 100 miles an hour to pick up a mail sack, which was catapulted into the air like a medieval torture device. The Youngstown pickups had some issues, though, and they never really were resolved. On one occasion, the steel ball broke off and struck the propeller. During another incident, the steel cable wrapped around the nose of the aircraft and forced it into a spin. At the end of the test, Clifford Ball found the airframe so damaged that it had to be rebuilt. 1933, the Great Depression begins. But the World's Fair was going on in Chicago, and it was an opportunity for Adams to demonstrate his pickup device once again. And he acquired 2 sponsors, New York Central Railroad and Braniff Airways. Here's a pretty good shot. They actually did the pickup test twice a day, and it was in the lagoon during the actual fair. So the fair spectators could come down there in the afternoon and watch the pickups. During the actual fair, a big siren would go off like 10 minutes before the pickups. So the crowds would gather down in the lagoon to watch this airplane come screaming in to pick up the mail sack. And it was 99% on time. They knew exactly, right on the nose, that plane would come in to make those pickups. On September 20th, 1934, Tros Seabree and Eddie Gerber carried 4,000 pieces of mail during those Chicago pickups. However, the enthusiasm waned and died when the fair ended, so there really was no contracts secured after the World's Fair. So disappointed once again, Adams goes back, and then he's contacted by this researcher from the New York Museum of Natural Science, Richard Archbald. And Richard Archbald is leading these expeditions in New Guinea, and he becomes very interested in the pickup system. What was happening was he was bringing these species of different animals out of the jungles, and they would die by the time he made it back to New York. So he came across the idea of maybe we can do pickups down in the jungles and bring the specimens back to New York. So there's no way that they could build this big trap mechanism in the middle of the jungles with a big catapult. So he sat down, scratched his head, and came up with the bamboo football type of system, which we see in this illustration here. There was 2 bamboo poles set apart like goalposts with a loop between them, which replaced that big cumbersome trap. That way, only the pole and the rigging would have to be carried through the jungles. The grapple was suspended from the plane and would make the pickup. At that moment, Adams knew that he was onto something. In less than 5 years, his goalpost airmail system would be serving 121 communities across the Mid-Atlantic region. Because Doc envisioned bringing the pickup system to all of the Americas, he established both the Tri-State Aviation Company and All-American Aviation Company. But the system was to be known as the Adams Air Pickup Service. So AAA was incorporated on March 5th, 1937. For 17 years, Adams vigorously promoted his pickup system in both the public and private arenas. He obtained congressional support for the ideas, but he never was able to arrange for long-term, hard-headed financial and engineering support. Consequently, when he did finally find the financial backing, he unwittingly gave up with both control of his patents and his company. He lost it. He lost his dreams. The capital, however, was located. Doc interviewed Felix and Richard DuPont of the prominent Delaware family. Richard DuPont was a world-renowned champion glider pilot who saw the potential immediately for the experimental mail pickup system. So on October 1st, 1938, Richard paid all the debts and took controlling shares of All-American Aviation. Ironically, the debts wasn't that much. Jim, what was it, like? It was under $100,000, I think. It wasn't that much at all. Yeah. So Richard DuPont would become the president of All-American. Doc Adams would become vice president. And Charlie Wendt from the DuPont company was brought in as secretary-treasurer. Richard Chichester DuPont was born in Wilmington, Delaware. He was the son of Alexis DuPont and Mary Chichester. As a young boy, he developed an enthusiasm for aviation and took flying lessons. His interest expanded into gliders. That was his big thing, the gliders. He attended the University of Virginia, where he founded the Soaring Club, and he attended the Curtis Wright Technical Institute, where he studied aviation. During that same year, his sister and him flew an open cockpit airplane up the Amazon River. What money can buy. In 1933, Richard DuPont partnered with Hawley Bolus to set up the Bolus DuPont Sailplane Company, a glider manufacturer in San Fernandino, California. And DuPont made the record flight in one of their sailplanes on September 21st, 1933. That aircraft is at the Air and Space Museum. There's Rintoul in both of these shots. It was in 1938 that DuPont takes control of All-American Aviation. The youthful DuPont was now in possession of the only patented method for the aerial nonstop delivery and pickup of airmail. Excited about the future prospects, the men, both DuPont and Doc Adams, began purchasing the airplanes and hiring pilots and staff to make the company operational. So Norm Rintoul flew for Adams prior to the All-American days, and you can see him in the top photo with DuPont. And Eddie Garber is in the following photo. But before they could do anything, they had to sell the idea to the postmaster. So right here in the backyard of this building, they did these tests. Congress, led by Jennings Randolph of West Virginia, was supportive of the plan. When Postmaster Farley failed to award any new routes, DuPont decided he would demonstrate the pickup at the Postmasters Convention right here in Washington during November of 1938. The demonstration was set upon the mall in front of the Capitol. The Stinson SR-10, which is out in the lobby, piloted by Norman Rintoul, made its run on the Capitol Mall. The demonstration was effective and convinced the postmasters in attendance. As a result of the demonstration and congressional support, the service was authorized as an experiment. Roosevelt signed the bill into law on April 30th, 1938. And they chose the Stinson Reliant, the gull-wing, tight-turning airplane adopted to flying around the hills and through valleys to do the airmail pickups. The first scheduled pickup began on May 12, 1939 in Latrobe, flying 2 experimental routes. The first route from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia, and the other was from Pittsburgh to Huntington, West Virginia. And that's the flight cover from the first pickup, 9 a.m. on May 12, 1939. The Stinson was painted bright red for easy identification. It had a long take-up boom with a hook and a winch that operated through an opening in the fuselage. We do have a hook that's passing around the room. Jim, do you have that? Yes. So the hook would be up here in the plane, and then it would pass down this tube. It had like a little groove on it, and you'll see on the hook that's passed around the room, they would just kind of drop it down the boom. And then it would kind of sit on the end of the boom, which you see out in the lobby there. And then it would come down and just grab that piece of rope and then snap right off. And then they would wheel it up with the winch into the airplane and pick up the mail sack. Very primitive, but very, very effective. Traveling between towns at 110 miles an hour, the Stinsons collected and delivered mail and express packages at each community without landing. For the next 10 years, a fleet of these planes provided air pickup to locations that could not be served by regular airmail service. All-American was the new courier of the Airways. In the first year of service, All-American flew over 438,000 miles, making over 23,000 pickups and handling 75,000 pounds of mail and 6,500 pounds of freight without a single casualty. With that type of reliability of the system, AAA received a certificate of convenience and necessity to engage in air transportation, and the first contract was called Airmail 49. As the second year of operation began, AAA Stinsons flew 4 flights daily on 5 different routes, radiating from Pittsburgh to towns and villages in 6 states: Pennsylvania, New York, West Virginia, Ohio, Kentucky, and Delaware. Can you hit that for me, please? This is the video that's looping out in the lobby right now. This was a promotional movie that All American filmed in 1940, and it actually shows the process in action. So the mail is loaded onto the Stinson, and the planes take off.
Could this be reloaded in flight? Could you do multiple pickups in one flight?
What do you mean? Yeah, they did. They went to several different stops. Yeah, there was a whole string of stops they would go through. Yeah, so there's two. There's the pilot, and then there's the guy in the back, the engineer, and then you have the postmaster who actually assembles the pickup point. It was a big treat for teachers to bring their students out to watch these pickups at these locations. It was very exciting. So you have the postmaster guy putting the mail in the sack for pickup. He attaches it to the goalpost. The Stinson comes in. The pilot's looking for identifiable features of the landscape. He finds it. He increases the speed, lowers the boom. The winch is brought down to the fuselage with the hook. It's brought out. The sack is attached to it. That's the sack that's going to be dropped off. That's the mail they're dropping off. They drop off the sack and they grab the new sack. At 110 miles an hour, it had to be amazing. And it's wheeled back in just like a fish. There's the hook, there's the sack. The flight engineer looks at it. Checks it out, throws it in the stack. And then they move on, they go to the next stop. Yeah, they parachuted down this one. This is special delivery, this one here, and you'll see why. And there's the new sack. Carton of eggs. No, they're not scrambled eggs. They are intact. So after America entered World War II in 1941, the military enlistment and letter writing soared. All Americans' pickup service grew as the volume of airmail during the war increased. The fleet of Stinsons was expanded from 5 to 11 planes, and the workforce grew to hundreds of employees. The All-American Engineering Department became very, very involved with research and development, especially as the war efforts continued. Over here you see Norm Rintoul doing the sheep pickups. The sheep has the most fragile bone system of any creature on Earth. So they wanted to eventually do manned pickups, but they had to test the theory, so they grabbed sheep to see if they could actually absorb the energy without causing any damage to the fragile bone system. And they did lose one sheep, but it wasn't so much from the thrust, it was because the thing wrapped around its neck, I believe. So the system did work. Oops, sorry. The mail, cargo, and personnel pickups were some of the tests that they started conducting back in the early 40s. But the air pickup system had 3 major components: the airborne mechanism, which was the energy absorber, the ground station, and the object to be picked up. The airborne mechanism was a compact energy absorbing reel with rope or cable hook and a retractable arm with hook that attaches to the fuselage of the plane. Now if you look at that Stinson down there right under the butt of the plane and look up, you'll see that actual device that has the cable wrapped around it. It still is in that aircraft out there. The ground station was simply 2 poles with small flags and rope clips at the tops. And 2 considerations were important in the operation of the air pickup: the elimination of possible damage to the objects being picked up and the prevention of overloading part of the aircraft or adversely influence its flying ability. And the factors of acceleration and distance of time were keys to the solution. And when properly controlled, the problems are quite simple. AAA would control the energy by utilizing cables with stretching properties. The material would gradually elongate over time and the forces would be reduced over this period. Then they would attach the cable to a reel and brake. The brake would be adjusted so that the distance would be controlled over a wide span and the weight would be varied. In this application, the weight is at rest on the ground and the support is actually in the aircraft. The pickup is completed when the weight is accelerated to the velocity of the aircraft. Physics 101. To test the brakes, instead of attaching it to an aircraft, go ahead and hit play. Instead of attaching one of these new brakes to an aircraft and potentially creating damage, they would take the winch, which is the energy absorbing material, and they attach it to a tree out in the back of All American. And they would do these little drive-by arrestments. And this is right in back of the Wilmington hangars. And that winch is the one that sits in that aircraft out in the hallway. It's amazing. Our company does vehicle arrestments now, vehicle arresting systems. So once in a while we break out this old footage and say, look at this, we've been doing this since 1942. So one of the more popular research and development projects that we worked on was demand pickups. It was very useful during World War II for getting spies in and out of enemy territory. The system was later modified for the jungles of Southeast Asia. Go ahead and hit play again. This pickup was piloted by Norman Toole. Oh, go back. No, here, I'll do it. Okay, go ahead.
I just got so nervous for him that.
Yeah, this is Harry Conway. This is the first pickup. In that aircraft, anyway, C-47. Yeah, it had to be pretty scary. Now watch, you'll see a person waving to him. This is great footage. Okay, so the cameraman zooms in on him. He's still alive, they think. Oh, he's moving, he's alive. And there's somebody's waving, hi! His name is Harry Conway. Yeah, he did hit his head on that. Yeah, I noticed that too. Yeah. It was pretty dangerous work these guys did. So the glider pickups. The architects of the U.S. Army Air Force's glider program determined that large troop and cargo gliders under development were simply too expensive to be abandoned after one mission. So All American demonstrated to the Air Force officials at Wright Field in 1942 that aerial retrieval of gliders was quite feasible. But during those tests, there were no gliders available. So they used a Piper Cub, which was actually piloted by DuPont. Oh, one more time. This clip is a little long, but since Norm Rintoul is in this a couple of times, I want to play the whole thing since his son is with us today. So I'm just going to sit back and let you watch this one. It's probably about 5 minutes long. That's DuPont right there, by the way. Richard DuPont. So they took off the prop and attached a little cable to it. That's pretty scary. So the same goalposts are used again. It's amazing what those primitive bamboo poles can do. Now the elasticity ropes that they're using was actually manufactured by the DuPont company. I guess it evolved into nylon as we know it.
Does it work better if you do it with your shirt on?
Yeah. So the aircraft you see here is the one that sits out here in the lobby again. And if you look at the tail number, you'll see it's the same number. So here comes the Stinson. And he lifts that Piper Cub within 100 feet. That is incredible force. And there's no jerking. It's a nice, gradual incline. Very smooth. Some pretty good nylon rope they made at DuPont Company. Yeah, DuPont himself is in it. Richard DuPont, the president of the company, is in that plane. And Norm Rintoul is flying the tug.
Now, they circle around and land in the same place, or they have another destination?
No, they'll land. Yeah, they'll land here. Yeah. They show because the gliders they wanted to use during the war, they could only use them once. They'd bring them up into the air, then land them and drop the cargo off, and then they couldn't use them again. Because of the cost factor involved, they wanted to get a couple missions out of them. So if these planes could fly down and pick them up and put them back into the air, then they could bring them to the next battle. And DuPont had great dreams of this glider thing. He wanted to daisy chain all of these gliders together to create almost like a train where they could pick up 10 of these things.
What was the normal takeoff method for a glider or launch method?
Yeah, I guess just,
So it would always get pulled behind an airplane to always.
Now, are they in radio contact? Is he the guy in the glider?
this was before radio contacts were used at All-American. They didn't start using the radios until I think the mid-40s, right around World War, right around 45, I think it was. Is that right, Jim? Do you remember that? Yeah, around 40. Yeah. Yeah, and you'll see that right here in a second. So that's the actual glider now. The other great thing about the gliders during the war were they were very inexpensive to produce. So you could, put 20 guys in a glider and bring them into a nice battle without having to worry about, the loss of an aircraft.
But they couldn't copy them.
What's that?
They could sneak in.
They could sneak in, right? Yeah, nice and quiet. So now all three of the aircraft are coming back in for a landing. there's the tow line. The Piper Cub comes in first for a landing. Then the glider comes in. And then our Stinson comes in. Yeah, it had the gull wing. I love that Woody pulling that aircraft. Oh, I thought there was a shot of Norm. It must be in the looping video. Somewhere I have a nice video clip of Norm Stinson looking through the window, waving at the camera. So in 1943, DuPont left to head the glider program as a special assistant to Hap Arnold. He would guide the glider program to its fullest potential as he witnessed the gliders being used as a warplane during the invasion of Sicily. He was convinced of the value of gliders for combat operations during wartime. Soon after, he returned to California to test the new military gliders. 3 months later, on September 11th, 1943, DuPont was killed when his experimental glider in which he was a passenger crashed during a demonstration at March Field in California. He was 31. And he used to fly this glider with that hat on? No, I'm kidding. During World War II, when it carried its largest volume of airmail, All-American Air Transport Division did not even break even. In fact, any profit the company made at all was a result of the military contracts placed within the engineering division. So the company argued unsuccessfully for a higher reimbursement rate from the post office. But support of the airmail pickup system declined after World War II in the face of high costs, lower airmail volume, and better rural delivery. However, the company continued to push its system by proposing to combine passenger service with airmail. So they went out and they purchased some aircraft that could do both. If you look at that aircraft on the left, you can see the boom coming out of its nose. It could pick up mail and passengers at the same time. And they did plenty of tests with it too, and everybody who were involved with those tests as passengers said it was very smooth and they had no problems with airmail pickup and passenger service. But fatal crashes in 1944 and 1945, the only fatal crashes for All-American, ended the public and congressional support for such an expansion. The CAB denied AAA the permission to expand into mixed passenger and pickup service. However, in 1948, the company was awarded a temporary certificate to carry passengers, but only if airmail was terminated. So that was the end of America's last mail-only aviation company, and the unique service was discontinued in 1949. Ironically, Norm Rintoul, you can see his name on the last flight cover there, along with Vic Usulides, the engineer. This was sent to Doc Adams, the last mail pickup, 1949. The president of All-American, Robert Love, realized the future of the company laid in passenger transport. He purchased DC-3s from the Army, refurbished them for passenger traffic. Later that year, the company was changed to All-American Airways. It was a passenger airline which operated out of National Airport in Washington, D.C., All-American Airways. There she is, right over the Capitol. But airmail pickup did not end there. Or air pickup did not end there, only airmail. There are plenty of other things to pick up after that. The engineering division of AAA split off from the main company in 1953 and became All-American Engineering, led by the original member, Charlie Wendt, who came over from DuPont back in the early days. He stayed on with the company until the 1980s. He was around a very long time. In 1953, All-American Airways became Allegheny Airways, which would later evolve into U.S. Airways in 1999. All-American Engineering, a big concern, followed World War II. Aircraft technology advanced dramatically during the 1950s with the jet fighter like the F-86. The first generation jet fighters had big price tags, and mechanical issues combined with lessons learned over Korea initiated the need to rethink safety for both the passenger and the high dollar asset. So the engineers at All-American had been developing aircraft arresting systems going back to the 1940s. This brochure from 1947 depicted a self-contained airborne arrestor with explosive anchor spikes. Rintoul would land the plane, and Vic in the back seat would take this little gun thing out and poof, shoot this little weapon thing into the ground, which was like a dart with that elastic cable, and it would bring the airplane to a nice stop. It was amazing. So getting the aircraft safely to the ground became a necessity. All-American engineer conducted the first fly-in arrestment on June 13, 1954. The aircraft was at 73 knots and weighed 1,200 pounds. All-American stopped the aircraft by using what was called the water squeezer technology. The part of the gear was actually a water-filled pipe buried under the ground on both sides of the runway, through which a loose-fitting piston was pulled. As the piston was pulled, it would absorb the energy of the landing aircraft. All-American in the 1960s moved on to mid-air retrieval systems of satellites and projectiles, missiles, satellites. They did air-to-air retrievals, as well as the spy satellite capsule recovery of the 1960s. Later in the 60s, they developed what would become the water twister, which we use today to stop jet aircraft. Moving on into the later 60s, the Vietnam War provided a lot of military contracts. We did a lot of stuff with CIA and some of these government organizations. We were doing arresting gear, barriers, nets, commercial aircraft arresting systems. We did the recovery of the Discoverer. We did helicopter recovery, water recovery, air-to-air recovery, the Saturn booster rocket recovery, the balloon recoveries, cargo delivery, the jet track jet cars, the turbo launchers, M1B launchers. We made tail hooks. We made the Model 90 winch, drag brakes, and towards the later part of the 60s, we got into UAV launch and recovery systems. We were giving an award at the White House for, I think it was called the E Award by Nixon, and it looks like LBJ was there. The old guy there is Charlie Went, the guy with the glasses there, kind of happy looking. Key historical events. In 1990, All-American Engineering merged with its main competitor, E.W. Bliss ADAC, and it formed Engineered Arresting Systems Corporation, which we're known as today. And we became the world-leading manufacturer of aircraft arresting systems. In 2002, ESCO was purchased by Zodiac, and now Zodiac is referred to as Zodiac Aerospace. Our division is the Emergency Arresting Systems Division. We're located in Aston, PA. And our division includes ESCO, which is the military arresting gear, UAV launchers in Aston, PA, which is only a couple miles from Wilmington, where we started our company back in the Adams days. The EMAS, we make commercial arresting beds, where this collapsible concrete is put at the end of runways where commercial airliners can run into it if they have an overrun issue. And our sister company is Airways. Our sister company is in France, and they make arresting gear and nets and other types of arresting systems. We currently operate our products out of 72 countries, and we're teamed up with the Navy to build the next generation aircraft arresting gear. The EMAS is the overrun protection material that I just mentioned, and we're trying to make an international presence with that as well as our arresting gear. Some of my sources, these are some great resources if you have the chance. A Place in the Sky by Richard Wiselick from the St. Vincent College is a great resource of information. Charlie Went, when he retired from the company, donated a lot of materials to the Hagley Library in Wilmington. The Air Pickup Handbook I came across, the Lyle Adams family. Robert Veazey was one of our great pilots that recently retired, and the U.S. Postal Museum, of course. And that concludes my presentation.